It was one of those things where East Carolina did all they could. They basically came into the big house and said, we're not going to allow Blake Corum, Donovan Edwards in this rush game to beat us. And they said, if you're going to do it, we're going to test J.J. McCarthy. We want to see if you've got anything in the pass game. And they went out. J.J. McCarthy was 26 of 30, was very effective in the pass game. And here's what I like about the growth of J.J. What I saw in the first game was his connection with the receivers, his ability to signal them at the line of scrimmage, something that he wanted. Maybe it was a nuance to the play, but also just his being able to deliver the ball on time, accurately, where it was supposed to be, where a receiver could actually do something. That's where I think the big growth for JJ was from last year to this year, and that's what I saw from him in the first game. Defensively, it was a run wall. East Carolina was able to find nothing on the ground, and then they tried to. It was a quick passing game, so we didn't have any sacks. We didn't get home, but there was Michigan tried a couple of different tricks. Didn't really bring any blitzes, but it was games up front. Kenneth Grant was able to come around on an NT stunt that affected the passer, which led to that first interception, the only interception of the game with Mikey Sanders still.
So on defense, I think I read it correctly. There were 5 new starters out there. They lost a ton to the NFL. So you just mentioned how good they were. What effect did the 5 new starters have, and how did they perform?
Well, they also had some injuries. Some guys like Will Johnson, who's going to be a sophomore this year, didn't play in that first game. Keyshawn Harris stepped in his role. And we were really trying to figure out who is going to be that corner that starts opposite of Will Johnson. Keyshawn Harris showed up, former walk-on at Michigan, is in his 5th year, played extremely well, played very disciplined. And so he's in the running for that spot. Another guy that had his first start, Josh Wallace, who's a transfer from UMass. And he's got a lot of experience at UMass, a 3-time captain there. He started as well and played very good football. Had an interception that was overturned. It was a tremendous athletic interception, but stepped out of bounds just before he got it. So there were some guys like Keon Saab, Zeke Berry that played and got some really good run in terms of the secondary. And that's really where we saw some of those new bodies defensively. But a lot of guys stepped up and put their resume together to say, hey, maybe we should earn a little bit more time as this season goes on.
Jon Jansen, nice enough to join us. He's the color voice for Michigan football on radio. He's a former Wolverine. He's doing the morning show on The Ticket in Detroit, and also good buddies with our buddy Derek Stevens down at the D, doing live shows this week. Let's go back to McCarthy for just 1 second. Did you see this growth coming? How did he grow this much? Because, remember a year ago, for some reason, Cade McNamara got game 1 start, and then McCarthy just took off from there.
Well, experience is going to be your best teacher. And he stepped in last year in that second game, took ownership of that quarterback position. And there were some bumps along the way. And last year didn't get a ton of opportunity to throw the ball deep until the end of the season against Ohio State and then against TCU, and a couple of critical turnovers against TCU in the college football playoffs. But the growth is, and he took a look at what he did well, what he didn't do well last year, and fixed some of those issues. And some of it's just being comfortable in year 2 as a starter, operating everything. They don't do it under center anymore, but sometimes under center. But at least, hey, when you get out there, they're giving him more to be able to do at the line of scrimmage, whether it's making adjustments with where guys are lined up, making sure the right personnel is on the field, but also, hey, you got a few plays. And if you see a couple of looks, you have the right to check to something that you might be able to put us in a better opportunity for any given look that you're seeing. That's where I've seen some of the growth. And then, as I mentioned earlier, it's just being able to be accurate, putting the ball, whether it's to a tight end that's in the flat we saw with Max Bredesen, being able to put the ball where he can catch it and actually turn upfield and do something with it. Quentin Johnston, the same thing. Roman Wilson with 3 touchdowns, same thing. And the difference from this year to last year is last year some of those balls would be completed, but it was a diving catch because the ball was just a little bit off the mark, or it was, hey, you got to slow up, you catch it, and then you're tackled right away. Being able to catch and run is going to be a big part of this offense, and JJ's development of location, understanding what's going on after the ball is snapped is really where I saw the biggest development.
You mentioned Wilson having the big game. That one interests me. Just the Michigan footprint for recruiting is everywhere. And they did steal Wilson out of our region, the Pacific time zone. I kind of wonder how that came together, getting a player from Hawaii, because Well, frankly, now that should be a focal point because you're going to be stealing guys from Hawaii away from the teams you're going to be playing with USC, UCLA, Washington, and Oregon coming to the Big Ten next year.
Yeah, it's wild to think the footprint of the Big Ten is now East Coast to West Coast. And Michigan is that national brand that when a kid grows up, if he grows up a Michigan fan and he's a good football player, you do have the means to go introduce yourself to them, recruit them, try and convince them that, hey, it's okay. You can travel 7,000 miles away from home. We'll make sure that we take good care of you. And when you have that reach, when you have that brand, recognition, it certainly helps in recruiting. And now that footprint is going to be coast to coast, I think it's going to help to be able to pluck some of those kids out of Texas, out of California. Hey, sorry to steal, but not sorry.
That's the way it goes, right?
Yeah.
Who are the head coaches or head coach? 2 and 1. Who is the head coach or head coaches with Harbaugh in the middle of his suspension?
Well, this week it's going to be his son, Jay Harbaugh, in the first half, and former Michigan great running backs coach, running game coordinator, Mike Hart. Both of those guys are going to share the duties this week. Jesse Minter did it last week against ECU. And, Jim Harbaugh and the coaches now call it the guardian of victory on Saturday. Who's going to be the coach out there that does things the right way to make sure it gives Michigan a chance to win the game? And Jay is a guy that's coached almost every position since he's been at Michigan. He's been a running backs coach. He's been a tight ends coach. He's on the defensive side of things. He's in the secondary right now. He's a special teams coordinator. He's really kind of followed the path that his uncle John Harbaugh did to the NFL, and he's going to get his first opportunity. We know Mike Hart here in Ann Arbor very well, the all-time leading rusher here at Michigan, but when he was at Indiana and a run game coordinator down there, just an unbelievable recruiter and a guy that understands the ins and outs of the run game, and he understands, and you can see this from the guys that he coaches, the value of possessing the football. He's got great leadership skills, so I think Michigan's in good hands this weekend.
How does it work with Coach Harbaugh during the week?
He's there from Sunday to Friday night, and then he's just not allowed to be in the stadium or around the team on Saturday. So he's a part of that collaborative effort to put together the game plan offensively and defensively. He's out there running practices. He's just not able to be in the stadium coaching the team on Saturday.
What do you think it was like watching this last game, and where did he watch it?
Well, Sharon Moore was also suspended for one game, so he actually went over to Coach Moore's house. They watched it in his basement. Coach Moore's wife apparently put together a hell of a spread, some cold cut sandwiches, and they were sitting there talking about different play calls that they would make. And Kirk Campbell, the new quarterbacks coach, stepped in as offensive coordinator. And I did ask him the question, hey, how did what you guys were talking about in the basement of Sharon Moore's house, and what would you call next? How did that match up with what Kirk Campbell was? And he said, for the most part, it was pretty spot on. They followed the game plan that they put together, and any decisions to ad lib was pretty much things that they thought they would do themselves.
Jon Jansen's with us, a former Wolverine. He's on the call for Michigan Radio against UNLV on Saturday. I wanted to pick your brain on the kind of guy Harbaugh is in terms of his mood. He seemed kind of jolly in his press conference after the East Carolina game. And the thing I found pretty interesting, I saw you tweeting out some notes about people not being on the field at practice, which, man, coaches are really tightly wound. And maybe you can do that because you're a former player. But this whole atmosphere has kind of changed with the injury thing and availability. And you can correct me on this. Do the Big Ten teams have to put out that availability report before the game, even in non-con games?
They do, and this is the first year, and as I'm sure you would understand, and you would be very grateful about this. When the teams used to come out, it was, hey, you got your binoculars on. Where's Will Johnson? Where is Roman Wilson? Where is Will Johnson? Like all of these different guys, you're trying to figure out, are they actually on the field? And then you could report it because then everybody could see it. Now, 2 hours before the game, and even in the non-conference games, they come to us. Dave Abeloff, the SID, comes to us and says, hey, here is the guys that are out. Here's the guys that are questionable game time decisions. And it makes our job so much easier to be able to just concentrate on those guys that are going to be out there. And so that was a bit of a pleasure. And obviously being in Vegas, that it makes a difference to certain individuals that may have certain ththings riding on the game, who's available, who's not. And I think ultimately with the partnership that, whether it's the Big Ten, it's schools, there's just so many partnerships with sports books and casinos that it just kind of was the next logical step.
As a former player, you're cool with this? I mean, you're talking like a media person, which I appreciate, but I'm assuming there's a lot of football people who are like, we hate this. Everything is supposed to be secret. By the way, I will also lay some blame at the feet. I know you mentioned the partnerships and integrity is important, but what went on down in Iowa is a mess. I heard Kirk Ferentz the other day kind of doing whataboutism. He's like, well, they're gambling in lots of places. Well, but you got caught, and the two programs there are the problem. But as a former player, can you still see kind of the coaching mentality where everything has to be buttoned up? We don't want to let our secrets out.
Well, I mean, yeah, during the week, sure. But this availability report comes out 2 hours before the game, and you've already put in all of that time to game plan. If, I'll use Will Johnson because he's such a good player defensively. And, what are you going to do if he's in the game? What are you going to do if he's out of the game? You've had to spend that time in meetings on the practice field preparing for that. 2 hours before the game, you get the message that, he's out or he's questionable. How much does that actually influence what's going to go on at the game? Because in another 30 minutes, you're going to see that he's either in pads or he's in street clothes.
Yeah, this is an interesting topic. I'm beating it to death, but do you think non-con teams should cooperate in these spots against the Big Ten and also put out a report 2 hours before the game?
I mean, no disrespect when I say this, but for UNLV, like it's not going to change a lot of what Michigan does. Now,
right.
if it's Notre Dame and Clemson, now I'm not even sure how that relationship works. With, in regards to they're in the ACC, they're not, but that's just an example of two teams that aren't in a conference where, availability reports could matter if you're forced to put one out and your opponent's not. Right. But come Saturday, again, like I said, this comes out 2 hours before the game. It really feels like it's more of a tip of the hat to, the books, or a tip of the hat to us in the media, where it takes 10 minutes for us to figure out who's out there and who's not. But I'd rather spend that 10 minutes not looking through my binoculars.
Is this Michigan team better than last year's Michigan team, John?
It is. It's deeper. It's more talented. I already talked about the experience and the benefits of having an experienced quarterback. But when you have the depth of talent that this team has, you've got a healthy Blake Corum, you've got Donovan Edwards in the backfield, you've got basically 9 guys on the offensive line that could be starting anywhere in the country. Colston Loveland at tight end, who's now a sophomore, who's a freshman last year. You've got depth at that position. You've got more depth. The young wide receivers, which we didn't see a lot last week, they're really going to be able to step up and play in the coming weeks. And offensively, they're better. Defensively, kind of the same thing. We didn't get a chance to see a lot from a guy like a Derek Moore or a Braden McGregor because they weren't able to get home on some of those pass rushes, but we saw that run wall. Chris Jenkins up front's another guy that's an absolute stud. There's just more depth of talent, more experience at every position on the football field, offensively and defensively, that I think it's you got to admit right now that it is a much more talented, much more experienced team than Michigan had the last couple of years.
Is this group better than your teams of the late 90s?
Oh, let's not get carried away here.
Uh-oh.
Let's not get carried away. You know what? This is going to be, and I'll compare them to that 97 team. They have a chance to be a much better team. They have a chance to do something more difficult. It's more difficult now to win a national championship than it was then. We didn't have a Big Ten championship game. We didn't have to go play 2 college football playoff games to win a national championship. And so they are built with that in mind, that they're going to have to be a deep team. They're going to have to overcome some injuries and some guys missing some games, some coaches missing some games. But this team has the potential to be better on both sides of the ball than we were in 97. Not going to say that they are. They're going to have to go out and prove it, but they have that potential.
If anyone in the Vegas audience is asking, hey, maybe they won't have the biggest crowd for a game against UNLV, looking up the streak now of 100,000 plus, that's pretty impressive. There's going to be 100,000 plus. It's a virtual lock.
Yes, and nobody counts that year of COVID, so we'll throw that one out as well.
Last one. Jon Jansen's with us, color voice for the Wolverines. Appreciate all the time here. What do you know about the UNLV scout? What do you know about their roster?
Honestly, I haven't done a deep dive in it yet. I know that coming off a 30-point win, it's got to be a team that's coming in with a lot of confidence. There's always going to be guys that you got to learn about that have come over and transfer, and some of those transfers are coming from some really good programs. So you've got talent, and it's more spread out talent around the country. So you've got to be aware of where certain guys are as receivers, where guys are lined up, and what a new coach is doing with the system. You've only got one data point of understanding, okay, what is this team going to be? Every year you got to try and figure out what the identity of a team is going to be, but what is UNLV going to be offensively, defensively, and special teams? What are their go-to plays? What are their some of the tells? What are some of the things that are going to give things away? And those are all the question marks that Michigan has right now as they continue to prepare for the Runnin' Rebels.
Yeah, UNLV has mined the transfer market. They've got 12-plus Power 5 guys in. Not a surprise. Guys look for playing time. One of the dudes is actually Ricky White, who might be a little-known receiver around the country, but he actually got you guys for 196 in that COVID game against Michigan State.
Like I said, we throw out that COVID year. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
I think what was it, about 8 catches for 190-plus yards. I mean, yeah, he was unstoppable on that day, and I unfortunately do remember what he has done to Michigan. So I think there's probably a few guys out there that have that memory as well.
Jon, we appreciate all the time, and enjoy yourself as much as you can doing a lot of radio when you're here in Vegas.
Steve, I appreciate it. Look forward to seeing you guys in the big house.